Hey there, fellow Patriots. Welcome back to another episode of Patriots of the American Republic. Let's go ahead and jump into it. You know, one of the easiest things to point out when it comes to the left is their constant flip-flop, their lies, their hypocrisy, and their double standards. Remarkably, there's hundreds of ways to show the left's abundant lies to the American people. None is more obvious or glaring than Kamala Harris campaigning on securing the border. I mean, the left has done an incredible job at gaslighting people regarding the economy. You know, the complexities around the economy allow them to find scapegoats in order to avoid taking responsibility for terrible policies that they've implemented and the lack of adequate budgeting that has fueled the inflation we are still experiencing 4 years later, after being told we weren't going to have any inflation and inflation would be transitory, right? But of the two major concerns facing America today, the border is one situation this administration cannot run from. And yet, they're doing their darndest to attempt to rewrite history. Now, in our prior video, we showed how Harris was put in charge of the border and was given the unofficial title of border czar. Having failed miserably, the media has to play cover-up and say that, you know, she was never given that title in order to help distance her away from the obvious failure, since she was selected to, you know, replace Biden, right? But as a reminder, let's just show you how these people will both face, you know, lie to you.
And since our country has been invaded by an army of over 8 million illegal aliens under the Biden-Harris administration, despite Kakala being supposedly in charge of the border czar, pretending that she was going to stop that problem, now the media is claiming that she never had anything to do with the border at all. This from Time Magazine. Kamal Harris was never Biden's border czar. Here's what she really did. Well, obviously, we know that she did nothing. This from Axios, one of these online wastes of cyberspace. The Trump campaign and Republicans have tagged Harris repeatedly with the border czar title, which she never actually had. That's interesting because here is an article from Axios a few years ago after she was appointed by Joe Biden as the border czar.
Vice President Harris was not a border czar.
Meantime, Vice President and border czar Kamala Harris facing some backlash.
What he said about Harris and immigration was not true. She was never appointed border czar.
And this will be her first visit to the U.S.-Mexico border region since she was appointed as the border czar by President Biden.
People going to have to counter the misinformation. You already hear folks talking about the border czar. She wasn't the border czar.
President Biden tapped Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, to be the border czar.
Now, she wasn't the border czar. That's what Republicans labeled her.
They were very critical of Kamala Harris, especially in her role as border czar.
Now what she's up against is folks lying about her border record, calling her a border czar.
Kamala Harris, who was appointed as the border czar.
The Biden team didn't declare her the border czar. They wanted her to work on kind of the root causes of immigration.
There has been so much criticism against Kamala Harris. You know, she was the border czar.
Calling her sort of the border czar, which wasn't necessarily the case.
So the border, if they weren't planning to address it in a major way, do not make her your border czar. She met with some of the Northern Triangle countries, but nothing has effectively changed.
So now, despite the media's attempt to gaslight the American people, we know exactly what was said the day Biden appointed her to tackle the, quote, stemming of migrants, or stemming, quote unquote, of the illegal immigrants, right? So that was the word that he used, stemming, right? And it was at the southern border. So let's just take a refresher, because we always got to remind ourselves what these people said.
And while the liberal media is pretending that she had nothing to do with the border crisis whatsoever, thanks to the power of the internet, we have a clip of old Joe admitting that she was at one time tasked with pretending to stop the problem.
I've asked her, the VP today, because she's the most qualified person to do it, to lead our efforts with Mexico and the Northern Triangle and the countries that help us. We're going to need help in stemming the movement of so many folks, stemming the migration to our southern border.
So after being appointed this task, Kamala Harris was utterly absent from the border. So much so that even left-wing media tried to pressure her on it.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
At some point, you know, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making.
I mean, we're going to the border. We've been to the border. I mean, does that really make sense? So you're going means future tense. You haven't been there. But then she immediately says that she's been there. No, she hasn't. And he rightfully calls her out. And then her response is, well, I haven't been to Europe. I don't understand. She doesn't understand his question. I don't understand her response. But that's just me. Now, for complete transparency, the White House later clarifies what her role actually was after the debacle, right? In part because I would imagine their plan was never really to tackle the issue, but to give us smoke and mirrors. So I do want to play this for you so that way you have complete information of what took place afterwards.
Amid mounting questions about when Vice President Kamala Harris would actually take a trip to Texas, the White House press secretary says the VP is not taking the lead on the administration's response to the crisis at the border. Instead, her focus is strictly on diplomacy with Mexico and the 3 Northern Triangle countries to address root causes of migration and to oversee the flow of U.S. aid to those countries.
The Vice President of the United States will be helping lead that effort, specifically the root causes, not the border. There's some confusion over that.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the vice president has no immediate plans to visit the border.
the root causes that they've actually put gasoline on, right? And that's nice that she's going to go and oversee the handouts that we give to other countries, right? It's just unbelievable. Absent at the border, so obviously they have to make excuses. They have to rewrite things in order to make it palatable to the American people. So, but here's the funny thing: since the beginning of her campaign run, Harris has attempted to reinvent herself as being tough on the border, as if border security is their biggest focus and how serious they take it. Right? On several occasions, she tried to make Trump seem like he caused the border problem. So that's the classic blame shift that politicians, that normal people do. Actually, it's not just politicians, but it's just more obvious when politicians do it. But let's check this out.
Trump directed his allies in the Senate to vote it down. Right. He tanked the bipartisan deal because he thought it would help him win an election. Which goes to show Donald Trump does not care about border security. He only cares about himself. And when I am president, I will work to actually solve the problem.
Crossings reached a record high in the Biden administration. This past June, President Biden imposed tough new asylum restrictions. We know the numbers since then have dropped significantly. But my question to you tonight is, why did the administration wait until 6 months before the election to act? And would you have done anything differently from President Biden on this?
So I'm the only person on this stage who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings. And let me say that the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill which I supported. And that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the border to help those folks who are working there right now overtime trying to do their job. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States. I know there are so many families watching tonight who have been personally affected by the surge of fentanyl in our country. That bill would have put more resources to allow us to prosecute transnational criminal organizations for trafficking in guns, drugs, and human beings. But you know what happened to that bill? Donald Trump got on the phone, called up some folks in Congress, and said, kill the bill. And you know why? Because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And understand, this comes at a time where the people of our country actually need a leader who engages in solutions, who actually addresses the problems at hand. But what we have in the former president is someone who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. Why I strongly supported the comprehensive border security bill. Written last year, as you know, by a bipartisan group of senators, including one of the most conservative members of the United States Congress. That bill would have hired 1,500 more border agents and officers. It would have paid for 100 inspection machines to detect fentanyl that is killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. It would have allowed us to more quickly and effectively remove those who come here illegally, and it would have increased the number of immigration judges and asylum officers. It was the strongest border security bill we have seen in decades. It was endorsed by the Border Patrol Union, and it should be in effect today, producing results in real time right now for our country. But Donald Trump tanked it. He picked up the phone and called some friends in Congress and said, stop the bill. Because you see, he prefers to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And the American people deserve a president who cares more about border security than playing political games and their personal political future.
You know, the ability to twist things is unbelievable, especially given the fact that we have video. All of this is on the internet, right? So, and I mean, she's just so scripted. She says the same things like verbatim. You know, it's like, wow, she practiced really hard at 3 different events to deliver the exact same lines. But anyhow, folks, you know, I'm not sure how this tactic is going to work with the majority of the American people. We clearly have video, like I said, of her telling the American people that the border is secure when they first took office, right? When we saw the influx of illegal immigrants, reports were coming out. Is it not? She was asked flat out, and she said the border is secure. Here we are, 4 years later, they're denying it, or they've moved past that denial, and they're saying that it's actually Trump's fault. There is a crisis, and it's Trump's fault. But let's just, again, reminder of what she said.
Would you call the border secure?
The border is secure.
We're going to have 2 million people cross this border for the first time ever.
That's in 1 year, by the way. 2 million in 1 year.
Confident this border's secure.
We have a secure border in that is a priority for any nation, including ours and our administration. But there are still a lot of problems that we are trying to fix, given the deterioration that happened over the last 4 years.
So, and so again, they're lying to you. They've been lying to you. Again, you could see there she was trying to blame Donald Trump for the fact that he was, listen, Donald Trump was so tough on the wall, or tough on the border, that he wanted to build a wall, and they called him a racist for it, and they fought him every step of the way. But he was the one who caused this migration issue. Again, the lies are absurd because they said that there was no crisis. So if Donald Trump caused the issue, then there would obviously have been the crisis from the moment that they took office going back. But that's not what happened. They were not given a crisis. That's why they refused to even call it a crisis, because by saying that it was a crisis, they knew they had to admit that it collapsed under their administration. And here is a montage of these people denying or refusing to call it a crisis when they first took power.
At this point, is this a crisis at the border?
Look, I don't think we need to sit here and put new labels on what we have already conveyed is challenging.
Do you believe that right now there's a crisis at the border?
I think that the answer is no. I think there is a challenge at the border that we are managing, and we have our resources dedicated to managing it.
Did you receive a briefing about the border today? Did you receive a briefing about the border today?
Yes, I did.
What did you learn?
A lot.
Is there a crisis at the border, sir? No, I won't be able to handle the problem.
Is it a crisis or just a challenge at the border? The White House going off message today about the situation before they had to walk it back. Take a look.
that they would be partners in dealing with the crisis on the border.
You said crisis on the border. Was that a
challenges on the border?
Okay, but so that doesn't reflect any change in administration's view of things.
Nope.
Children who are frightened and crying, overcrowded conditions. Now that the public has seen that, is that not a crisis? And what conditions or situations, what metrics would have to be in place for the administration to call it that?
Well, children presenting at our border who are fleeing violence, who are fleeing prosecution, who are fleeing terrible situations is not a crisis.
Yeah, there's no crisis. It's just a challenge, right? Listen, this past Friday, Harris finally manages to make it to the border. It only took her a bid for presidency to get her to visit the border. Now, during a speech in Arizona, she said the American people deserve a president who cares about border security, quote unquote. How can she claim to be tough on the border when she didn't visit it? They told people that they wouldn't deport them if they came. They promised them benefits and more. So how can she claim to be tough when she's giving this out? This administration has not only aided the flux of illegal immigration, but they've also prevented security measures taken by border states to try and stop the flow of illegal immigrants.
We have some more breaking news from Austin. A federal judge has ordered the state to remove the floating barrier in the Rio Grande. The buoys were put out there in July to prevent migrants from crossing the border. The judge gave Texas until September 15th to take that barrier down. The Justice Department says the state put up the buoys without permission.
Governor Ducey has agreed to take down the boxcars that were being used to kind of fill some gaps in the U.S.-Mexico border. They were put out there, shipping containers. Last week, the federal government sued to get the containers removed so then they could have these big gaps in the wall.
The Supreme Court will allow Border Patrol agents to remove razor wire that was installed by Texas along the southern border. The High Court granted an emergency request filed by the Biden administration. It argued the wire prevents agents from reaching migrants who have already crossed over. Texas Governor Greg Abbott ordered the wire to be installed near the Rio Grande River as part of the operation to prevent illegal immigration.
Bill Malugin tweeted this out yesterday, that we now know how some of the migrants are getting in, even though the walls are working. Look at this.
Yeah, the walls work and the gates work if the locks stay on them. But look at this video. So the Fox News was down there and we witnessed the National Guard locking this gate at the border on private property at a major crossing area in Eagle Pass to deny the illegals to come further into the U.S. Then Fox News witnesses the Border Patrol agents come along with a key. They open the gate to illegals that are standing outside of the gate and allowed them to go through for processing, all with the Texas National Guard just standing there watching.
Neither Joe Biden nor Kamala Harris have been tough on the border, nor will they be tough on the border, as Border Patrol Chief confirms he has not been contacted by either one earlier this year.
She just let in 10 million illegals. Half of them were convicted criminals. That means about 5% of the Biden-Harris migrants are ex-cons. And Biden-Harris have no idea where they are. They let in 13,000 convicted murderers and lost track of them. They let in 15,000 convicted rapists, and now they're gone. I always assumed when an illegal was caught by Border Patrol and they did a background check and they found out the guy was a convicted murderer, they'd immediately detain them and deport them. But no, I had no idea Biden and Harris were catching convicted killers and letting them loose into the country. And the media called Trump a liar for saying countries were emptying their prisons. Well, where do you think 500,000 ex-cons came from? The gym? The fact that they impeached him over a phone call while Biden and Harris are processing rapists and murderers into the country. How is that not high crimes and misdemeanors? So along with the 300,000 migrant kids they lost, Biden and Harris lost tens of thousands of migrant killers and rapists, and the whole time they said the border was secure. Democrats say Trump's dangerous. How? because Kamala Harris is importing convicted murderers and rapists into America and then lying about it. She's the most dangerous presidential nominee in the history of American politics. She's created a geyser of sex trafficking, crime, addiction that'll impact America for decades. And she never went to the border once, but decided to go today of all days, a month before the election. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the election. Kamala is in the Tucson sector of Arizona tonight, the epicenter of her crisis. Look at how Biden-Harris blew open the border in Tucson after it was under control. And now she's there for a photo op on the eve of the election. And look how staged this border visit is. Kamala was only actually at the border from 6:11 p.m. to 6:30 p.m., less than 20 minutes. That's not visiting the border. That's just a photo op. Kamala is blaming Trump for the problem she created and telling you everything she wants to do to fix it, but never did when she had the chance. She says it's time for a strong border. Well, why hasn't she done it? She's stopped Trump's border wall and then sold the extra steel for scrap. She ended Remain in Mexico. She brought back catch and release and has deported less than 1% of the illegals she let in. Less than 1%. If she wants to stop illegal immigration, she should stop flying them into the country. She claims the border crossing numbers are down. She's just not counting the migrants she's flying here and sending to the ports of entry so they can break into the country with their border app. Remember the one you make a reservation to break into the country with? Open table for illegals, as we call it. And what's the point of asking for more Border Patrol agents if they're just going to keep catching and releasing people? How can all of this be Trump's fault if he's not in power? But she is. He doesn't have the power to do anything about the border. She does. Kamala keeps saying she prosecuted drug cartels in California. Then why didn't she do anything as vice president? The cartels quadrupled their cash flow under Harris. They're the only ones who have wages going up. If Kamala Harris really wanted to secure the border, she would have called the Border Patrol chief and made a plan.
I've never had one conversation with the president or the vice president for that matter. And so I was the chief of the Border Patrol. I commanded 21,000 people. That's a problem.
Think about how backwards all of this is. The border czar brings 500,000 criminals into the country and thinks it's mean to deport them. She thinks it's cruel to deport criminals. She's actually promising mass amnesty instead of mass deportations, when the majority of the country wants mass deportations.
This administration has abused the asylum system for migrants, endangered women and children by exposing them to human traffickers, drug cartels, and other life-threatening scenarios. They've allowed and assisted with rapists, murderers, and pedophiles to enter our country. Now, here is a former Custom and Border Patrol head testifying before Congress under oath regarding what he saw and experienced under this administration.
In San Diego, we had an exponential increase in significant interest aliens. These are aliens with significant ties to terrorism. Prior to this administration, the San Diego sector averaged 10 to 15 SIA arrests per year. Once word was out the border was far easier to cross, San Diego went to over 100 SIAs in 2022, well over that in 2023, and even more than that registered this year. These are only the ones we caught. At the time, I was told I could not release any information on this increase in SIAs or mention any of the arrests. The administration was trying to convince the public there was no threat at the border. Fentanyl is another issue. The San Diego area sees between 80 and 90% of the methamphetamine and fentanyl seizures annually for our entire country. With little enforcement at the border, these drugs were coming through en masse. During my last year in San Diego, the price for a single pill of fentanyl, for example, went from $10 to 25 cents. To make matters worse, during 2022 and 23, I had to shut down San Diego traffic checkpoints, which are critical for drug interdiction, because the resources had been diverted to the process and release mission. The large numbers also had and still have a negative impact on the San Diego community. I had to release illegal aliens by the hundreds each day into communities who could not support them. To quiet the problem, 2 flights a week were provided from San Diego to Texas. These flights simply brought aliens that would have been released in San Diego over to Texas. Each flight cost approximately $150,000. This was the administration's way to try and quiet the border-wide crisis.
It's unbelievable to me what this man has testified to, with clear and obvious examples to go off of. And yet some people are buying it or ignoring these facts because of some superficial reason. I mean, this administration, in my opinion, has betrayed the American people, and I don't understand how this doesn't fall under the realm of treason, to be quite frank. Now, in addition to this gentleman's testimony, ICE has also released some very, very interesting numbers just a couple days ago.
ICE has something called a non-detained docket. Essentially what that is it means migrants who were encountered by DHS but are no longer in federal custody. So who's on this non-detained docket? It's illegal immigrants who were caught and released at the border, released with the court date years away. They're in immigration proceedings, combined with illegal immigrants who have already been ordered deported from the country by a judge, but are still here roaming the country. So keep that in mind, this non-detained docket. According to a letter that the acting director of ICE just sent to Texas Congressman Tony Gonzalez, on ICE's non-detained docket, they're currently tracking 425,000 non-citizens who have been convicted of a crime. Of that number, over 13,000 non-citizens have convictions for homicide and are on the non-detained docket, meaning they're roaming the country right now. On top of that, there are another 15,811 non-citizens convicted of sexual assault who are roaming the country right now on ICE's non-detained docket. It doesn't stop there. Those are convictions. The ICE director also says there are currently just under 1,900 non-citizens on the non-detained docket who have pending homicide charges who are roaming the country, and another 4,250 non-citizens who have pending assault charges who are roaming the country on the non-detained docket. So,
in that speech in Arizona, she talked about a number of different things, like the border bill, the very conservative border bill, and how it was going to do this and increase resources and increase boots on the ground. They're catching and releasing them. It doesn't matter how many boots you have in the ground. If that's your policy to get these people, you process them and then you let them in, and you're letting in criminals. I mean, at this juncture, yes, I mean, we're talking about everybody, but it's more specifically the people that are coming over. There's a percentage of them that are actual hardened criminals. And this administration is letting them in and releasing them into our society. Like that just doesn't make sense to me. In a normal world, the government is supposed to protect us from threats abroad and from within. I mean, that's what we pay taxes. That's in part what we pay taxes for, right? So this administration is just unbelievable with what they're doing. I've never seen such a self-defeating policy in my life, to be quite frank. So thankfully, there are some on CNN that can see through the lies of Harris and have been calling her out on it. And, kudos to this guy, because it's not the only clip that I've seen of him actually producing facts that contradict their lies.
Anderson, it's worse than that. It's not that it took them too long. It's that they actively worked to undo everything Donald Trump had done during his time in office. On the first day, they rescinded all of Donald Trump's border executive orders. The floodgates opened. All these people come rushing across. Then it becomes a political problem. And now at the end of the election, they want to blame it on Donald Trump. For her entire career, she has wanted a more permissive immigration structure. When she ran for president before, she wanted to decriminalize border crossings. In her heart of hearts, she wants a more liberal, permissive immigration structure. And in his heart of hearts, Donald Trump wants to crack down on the border. That's why when you look at the CNN polling this week, Trump is far more trusted on immigration than Harris. That is not going to change because of this visit today or anything she says today. The die is cast on this issue. If I were her, I'd want to bury this issue, not make it more prominent. But hey, if she wants to have border events, I think Republicans will rejoice because it'll increase the prominence of this issue for the last month of the campaign.
So they took away everything that Trump had put in place, opening up the floodgates, if you will, causing an issue, and then they want to blame it on Trump. It's unbelievable. Kudos to this gentleman, one of the very few that still have some type of integrity and sense of actual journalism amongst the network full of sellouts and corrupt wannabes, in my opinion. But I mean, you can clearly see, folks, what's going on from beginning to even right now. Don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. Towards the end of 2019, Joe Biden entered the presidential race extremely late by normal political means. The reality is that none of the candidates, including Kamala Harris, were polling well enough to even compete against Trump. So despite Joe Biden's obvious mental decline, the DNC essentially parted the Red Sea for him due to his connection with Obama. For his entire political career, Joe Biden has been a moderate. And due to the socialistic popularity brought forth by Bernie Sanders in 2016 that carried over into 2020, every Democrat running in 2020 would have to out-left each other. And it was no different for Joe Biden. As a matter of fact, I had a friend of mine that we were messaging back and forth, and I told him Joe Biden is now going to have to out-left all of these people on that stage, and that's exactly what happened. So despite having deported more illegal immigrants under the Obama administration, he would now have to shift stance and kind of take an open border policy, which they both campaigned on back in 2020. They never had any intentions of securing the border. We know that because when Trump talked about building the wall, Kamala Harris fought it, and she even called it a vanity project. They never, ever, ever had the intentions to really secure the border because it was part of their plan to change the voting demographic of this country. That's been their top priority. We can see it right here.
With education, down, down with deportation. Up 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 with education, down, down with deportation.
Down with deportation. Now that video was when she was campaigning back in 2020. But again, that's what she was campaigning on back then. So either she's lying to the American people now, or she's flip-flopped. And I'd like to say that she's lying to us. Because nothing that she's done, or nothing that this administration done, has corrected the course. Now, the majority of this country isn't buying whatever they're selling, including many in their own party. So how do they manage to hold on to their political power? By importing a new loyal voting bloc. See, that's the bottom line here, guys. They've lost touch with the average American person. The middle class, the hard worker, the blue collar. They've lost touch with those people. So they can't get them on their policies. Look, they're doing all of these insane radical policies, and nobody's buying into it, right? Or a large portion, aren't buying into it. So if you disconnect from your base, if you lose that, what do? You bring in a whole bunch more. They don't have to do much. They just have to open the border, give them citizenship, and they got them. Even if you look at today's numbers, let's say just focusing on the Hispanic community, over 70% of the Hispanic community votes Democrat. They'll take those numbers, even from across the border. It'll be higher, obviously, because they'll have some type of gratitude towards it. But that's their plan. It's obvious, because how else do you explain allowing murderers, rapists, killers, gang members, and pedophiles into the country and not deport them? I mean, that should be a no-brainer, a non-controversial issue. You deport anybody that you catch that is a hardened criminal. But they don't. They haven't. They're releasing them into the streets, and these people are committing crimes against American citizens of all shapes and colors. This is absolutely absurd, and I hope and pray that the American people in a couple of days don't fall for this obvious lie that she's trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. So guys, that's what I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for joining me. God bless you guys. God bless America. And God bless Donald Trump. Till next time, peace out.